On a sunny March morning in the bustling streets of Manila, Manny Pacquiao walked discreetly among the crowd that began to gather upon recognizing him. His calloused hands held a yellowed envelope containing an address scribbled by hand decades ago. The world boxing champion, now 45 years old, had made a decision that intrigued even his closest advisors to revisit a past that few knew about. Manila's humid heat weighed on his shoulders as he observed the old buildings that still resisted time. His memories transported him to an era when he wasn't the Pambansang Kamao, the national fist of the Philippines, but just a skinny, determined boy fighting for a chance. The worldwide fame, the belts, the crowd screaming his name seemed distant when he remembered those early difficult days. The envelope in his hands contained more than just a simple address. It was a symbol of an emotional debt he had carried for more than 2 decades. Manny knew he needed to make that visit, not as the champion he had become, but as the man he had always been inside. The humility that had characterized him since childhood drove him to face a ghost from the past that had never completely left his thoughts. His steps became slower as he approached the neighborhood where it all began. The narrow streets and familiar sounds of the Filipino community awakened deep nostalgia in his heart. Manny took a deep breath, knowing he was about to relive one of the most difficult moments of his youth, but also potentially one of the most transformative of his adult life. The decision to make that visit hadn't been impulsive. For weeks, he had reflected on the meaning of gratitude and forgiveness. As a father and public figure, Manny understood that some wounds from the past need to be healed, not only by those who suffered them, but also by those who caused them. He was ready for a reunion that would change the perspective of both parties involved. The Kamatayan Boxing Club, a gym, hid between small commercial establishments on a side street in Quezon City. Manny stopped in front of the worn entrance, observing the peeling paint and dusty windows that barely let light through. The place that once bustled with the energy of young fighters now seemed dormant, as if time had passed by, leaving only echoes of past glories. The rusty sign still hung above the door, with some letters already illegible. Manny smiled melancholically as he recognized every detail of that environment that had shaped not only his physique, but his warrior mentality. It was there that he had learned the first lessons about discipline, respect, and perseverance. Lessons that would accompany him throughout his life, even after the painful rejection he had experienced. The familiar sound of punching bags echoed faintly from inside, indicating that the gym still maintained some activity. Manny could smell the characteristic scent of sweat mixed with leather equipment, an aroma that immediately transported him to his 15 years of age. Back then, he would arrive at the gym while it was still dawn, waiting at the door until someone opened it, hoping to get a few hours of training. Through the dirty windows, he could glimpse shadows moving inside. Young fighters, probably the same age he was when he frequented that place, trained with the same hunger and determination he had felt decades ago. The cycle continued, and new dreams were being forged in that simple space, yet loaded with meaning. Manny hesitated for a moment before pushing the door. He knew that on the other side, he would find the man who had profoundly marked his trajectory, not for what he had taught, but for what he had denied. Coach Simplicio piling Ramos, who had kicked young Manny out of the gym decades ago, probably never imagined that the skinny and persistent boy would become a worldwide boxing legend. Manny pushed the creaking door and entered the gym with cautious steps. The environment was darker than he remembered, illuminated only by some yellowish bulbs hanging from the low ceiling. 5 young fighters trained on the punching bags, their rhythmic movements creating a familiar symphony of impacts and panting breaths. In the corner of the gym, a gray-haired man watched attentively, taking notes in a worn notebook. Coach Simplicio Ramos, now 68 years old, maintained the upright posture characteristic of someone who had dedicated his life to boxing. His calloused hands held the stopwatch with the same precision from decades ago, and his experienced eyes didn't miss any detail of his pupils' movements. He wore the same simple white t-shirt and blue shorts he used when Manny was just another boy dreaming of fame. For a few minutes, Manny remained standing at the entrance, discreetly observing the man who had rejected his dream so many years ago. The light filtered through the dirty windows created a play of shadows that made the moment even more cinematic. The sounds of the gym, the blows on the bags, the intense breathing, the feet sliding on the floor, formed a soundtrack that awakened deep memories in the champion's heart. Simplicio continued concentrated on his work, without noticing the presence of the illustrious visitor. He shouted technical guidance to the young men, his hoarse voice echoing through the gym walls with the same authority as always. Manny could see that, despite his advanced age, the coach maintained his passion for the sport that had shaped generations of Filipino fighters. The irony of the situation didn't go unnoticed by Manny. There he was, one of the most famous boxers in the world, discreetly watching the man who had doubted his potential. Time had proven who was right, but Manny felt no resentment, only a deep need for reconciliation and understanding. He took a deep breath, preparing to take the first step toward the man who had unexpectedly changed the course of his life. One of the young fighters was the first to notice Manny's presence. His eyes widened in complete disbelief, and he abruptly stopped hitting the punching bag. Silence gradually took over the gym as the other young men also realized who was standing at the entrance. Their faces reflected a mixture of admiration, shock, and nervousness before the living legend who had appeared in their humble training place. Simplicio noticed the sudden change in the environment and turned around irritated, ready to reprimand his students for their lack of concentration. His words got stuck in his throat when his eyes met Manny Pacquiao's. The stopwatch slipped from his trembling hands, falling to the floor with a metallic sound that echoed through the now completely silent gym. The coach's aged face went through a series of expressions in a matter of seconds: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, a mixture of shame and admiration. His legs seemed to have lost their firmness, and he discreetly leaned against the wall behind him. Decades of regret and questioning about his past decisions seemed to have materialized before him, in the form of the man he had rejected. Manny took a few steps toward the center of the gym, his movements slow and respectful. He wore simple clothes, a white t-shirt and jeans, devoid of any ostentation that could intimidate or create barriers. His gentle eyes never stopped looking at the coach's face, communicating a silent message of peace and reconciliation. The tension in the air was palpable. The young fighters remained motionless, witnessing a historic moment without even fully understanding its magnitude. Simplicio fought against the emotions that threatened to overflow, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to process the reality of having the greatest Filipino boxer in history standing in his modest gym. The weight of years and decisions made seemed to have materialized in that crucial instant. Manny stopped a few meters from Simplicio, and for a moment that seemed like an eternity. The two men looked at each other in silence. The gym seemed to have transformed into a time capsule, where past and present met in a delicate dance of unexpressed emotions. The young fighters continued paralyzed, sensing they were witnessing something much greater than a simple, casual encounter. Simplicio was the first to break the silence, his voice coming out as a hoarse whisper laden with emotion. He spoke in Tagalog, expressing his disbelief and repeatedly asking for forgiveness. His words came broken, as if decades of regret had finally found an outlet. The elderly coach seemed to have shrunk before the champion's presence, not from intimidation, but from the weight of conscience. Manny responded with the same gentleness that had always characterized him, his calm and respectful voice echoing through the gym walls. He explained that he hadn't come seeking satisfaction or to demonstrate superiority, but rather to give thanks. The confusion on Simplicio's face was evident. How could someone thank for being rejected and publicly humiliated decades ago? The world champion began to recount how that rejection had become one of the most transformative moments of his life. He explained that after being kicked out of the gym, he had discovered an even greater determination within himself. The pain of rejection had transformed into fuel for a fire that would never be extinguished again. Each subsequent victory, each belt conquered, carried with it the memory of that difficult day. The revelation hit Simplicio like a direct punch. His legs finally gave way, and he sat on a nearby bench, his hands covering his face as tears began to stream between his fingers. The young fighters watched in respectful silence, understanding they were witnessing a moment of profound human reconciliation. The weight of years and decisions made seemed to be released in that instant of pure emotional truth. Manny slowly approached the coach, who was crying silently. His words continued flowing with gentleness, explaining that the success he had achieved wouldn't have been possible without that moment of rejection that had forged his character. He spoke about forgiveness, about how he had learned that some of life's greatest blessings come disguised as apparent disappointments. Simplicio raised his face, his red eyes meeting Manny's with raw vulnerability. The elderly coach tried to speak, but words were lost between sobs of regret and admiration. He extended his trembling hands, as if wanting to touch the man before him to confirm it wasn't a dream, but at the same time hesitated, feeling unworthy of such proximity. It was then that Manny took the initiative. With a genuine smile that illuminated his entire face, he opened his arms and took a step forward. The simple gesture, yet loaded with meaning, was enough to break all the barriers that time had built. Simplicio rose unsteadily and, unable to contain his emotion, threw himself into the champion's arms. The embrace lasted several minutes, both men allowing themselves to feel the emotional weight of that moment. Simplicio cried openly, repeatedly asking for forgiveness, while Manny consoled him with gentle pats on the back. The young fighters watched in silence, some with tears in their eyes, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended boxing or fame. One of the young men, without anyone noticing, had started filming the moment with his cell phone. The images captured the pure essence of human reconciliation, two men separated by decades and circumstances, finding each other in an embrace that symbolized forgiveness, gratitude, and the beauty of redemption. The video size, which would spread across social media within hours, would show the world that true greatness lies not in achievements, but in the ability to forgive and transform pain into wisdom. After the emotional embrace, the two men sat on an improvised bench made from old boxing equipment. The gym's atmosphere seemed to have transformed, as if the tension accumulated over decades had been released in that moment of reconciliation. The young fighters, still impacted by what they had witnessed, continued their training in respectful silence, allowing the two men to converse without interruptions. Simplicio began to tell his version of the story, his words laden with regret and reflection. He explained that at that time, he was going through serious financial and personal difficulties, and that his decision to expel young Manny had been influenced by external pressures and the need to keep only the fighters who could pay their full monthly fees. The elderly coach admitted he had allowed economic circumstances to cloud his judgment about real potential. Manny listened attentively, his serene face showing genuine understanding. He shared details about how that moment had been devastating for a teenager who saw boxing as his only hope of escaping poverty. He told about the nights he had spent awake, questioning whether he really had talent or was just deluding himself with impossible dreams. The world champion revealed that it had taken years to transform that pain into positive motivation. He described how each subsequent training session, each fight, each victory carried with it the memory of that day at the gym. The rejection had become constant fuel that propelled him to prove not only to the world, but to himself, that there was something special inside him waiting to be discovered. Simplicio listened to each word with deep attention, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and melancholy. He recognized that, ironically, his rejection had contributed to forging the exceptional character that made Manny not only a great fighter, but an admirable person. The elderly coach began to understand that some of life's greatest mistakes can inadvertently become catalysts for extraordinary achievements. As the conversation deepened, a crowd began to form outside the gym. News of Manny Pacquiao's presence had spread quickly through the neighborhood, and dozens of people gathered, trying to glimpse the champion through the dusty windows. The external commotion contrasted with the intimate and reflective atmosphere that dominated the gym's interior. Manny noticed the growing crowd and knew his private time with Simplicio was coming to an end. He stood up and, with a gesture that surprised everyone, asked the elderly coach to show him the young fighters who were training. One by one, Simplicio introduced his pupils, speaking with pride about each one's potential, his voice now firmer and more confident. The world champion briefly conversed with each young man, offering words of encouragement and technical advice. He emphasized the importance of perseverance, humility, and respect for coaches, even when circumstances seem unfavorable. His eyes sparkled as he saw the impact of his words on the hopeful faces of the future fighters. Before leaving, Manny made an offer that left everyone emotional. He proposed to fund some new equipment for the gym and offered a scholarship for the young fighter who demonstrated the greatest dedication and progress in the coming months. Simplicio tried to refuse, claiming he didn't deserve such generosity. But Manny insisted, explaining it was his way of honoring the place where he had learned valuable lessons about life. The moment of departure was filled with emotion. Simplicio accompanied Manny to the door, where the crowd waited anxiously. The elderly coach watched with pride as the champion greeted each person, taking photos and signing autographs with the same gentleness he had shown inside the gym. When Manny finally walked away, Simplicio remained at the door, his tears now of gratitude and redemption, knowing that day had changed not only his perspective on the past, but also his future as a coach and human being. The video of the embrace between the two men would become viral on social media, touching millions of hearts around the world. People shared the story as a powerful example of how forgiveness and gratitude can transform past wounds into present blessings. Manny Pacquiao's simple gesture had not only healed an old hurt, but also inspired countless people to reflect on their own capacities to forgive and be grateful for the experiences that shaped their paths.
Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.